Have you tried therapy before but stopped because you didn't think it was working for you? Or have you heard stories from someone else that has made you question whether therapy is something that is effective or not? We've all been living through collective trauma with this global pandemic, and I know that that's had a huge impact on people's mental health and wellness. And so I just wanted to share with you some information that might help you to better navigate the mental health system and understand some of the reasons why previous experiences or things that you've heard didn't work, um, but therapy itself can be beneficial. So my name is Nicole Shiner. I'm a registered psychotherapist in Ontario, and I'm providing virtual sessions as well as workshops for organizations of all sizes for mental health and wellness and trauma-informed workshops. And so I want to share with you 10 things that can impact one's experience of counseling in a negative way and therefore make you feel that that's not working for you. And as I share those things, I'm also going to share a little bit about my own perspective and practice, having been in the field now for almost 20 years. So the first reason often has to do with client-counselor fit. In fact, research shows that that is the most contributing factor to successful outcome of therapy. Does the client feel comfortable with the therapist? And you know what? It's a feeling. It's an energetic connection, and it's important to trust your gut. And if you have that experience, maybe you think the person is nice, but you're not clicking, you're not fitting with them, then that doesn't mean that therapy itself can't work or be effective, but you might just need to try somebody different. So a lot of therapists, including myself, will offer a free 10 to 15 minute consultation, which allows you to just to talk and to get a sense of that person, of their energy, of how you feel in conversation with them. And so that can help to avoid the experience of starting the process and opening up, which is hard, and then only to discover that it's not a right fit. Another area where there can be a mismatch and you can leave the process feeling like it didn't work is when there is a mismatch in terms of the therapist's approaches or modalities that they use versus your way of learning and knowing and growing and healing. And so some approaches can be more rigid, more structured, and sometimes that's necessary for safety reasons. A lot of therapists, though, that have been doing this work for a long time, including myself, practice more from an eclectic perspective, which means using kind of various theories and approaches and weaving those in to the work and to common themes and issues based on the client, right? And how you present yourself and how you learn and what is important to you and what serves and supports and nurtures you on your healing journey, which that may include holistic things or spiritual things. And so if you feel like your therapist is more rigid and you don't feel like there's room for your input or some of these other strengths that you have drawn on to support you, then of course you're not going to feel as positive about the experience. You're not going to feel like it's really fitting for you and what you need. Another area that's really important and can essentially be dangerous is the idea of pacing, or what's referred to as titration. And so if you're working with if you've worked with someone, or you've heard of, a friend or a family member that's worked with someone that has gone too deep, too fast, right? Or too much, too soon. Okay? And so that essentially is not honoring the pacing and not honoring the importance of, creating a sense of stabilization and supports practices that you can draw on outside of the therapy to help to contain and to soothe and reset your nervous system, to deal with, say, for example, flashbacks or nightmares that might bubble up to the surface if you have been talking about trauma, for example, in the session. So that is super, super important. And sometimes people stop coming because they feel overwhelmed by the process. And that makes sense. That's not your fault. The pacing is so important. And also keeping in mind, like, what else is going on in your life? And do you have the capacity, right? So sometimes, even though you may want to work on a piece that is heavy or traumatic, we have to look at the bigger picture of your life and what you have the capacity for. And so sometimes, again, it's more about supporting you with those coping and self-soothing and self-compassion practices, rather than going deep into, actual memories or issues that could, overwhelm your system and also have an impact on you physically, not just emotionally or mentally. So ultimately in therapy, in the session itself, you should feel like there's a sense of beginning, middle, and end, and you should never feel kind of opened up and raw and vulnerable and then sent off on your way. You should always be supported and encouraged to kind of close things back up and have a plan for safety. Another area where you may have found that you became frustrated or even felt like you were failing as a client is if the therapist did not take into consideration how your mental health or physical pain was impacting your frontal lobe functioning. So we know that anxiety, depression, chronic pain, brain injury, trauma, these things are all going to have an impact on our frontal lobe functioning. That's our ability to focus, to concentrate, to remember, right? To problem solve. So, if you are given a bunch of information verbally, and then you are told homework that you're supposed to do, and there is no sort of checking in to see, again, are you able to focus, to concentrate, to remember this? Is there any kind of follow-up as far as a handout or a website that's sent? Is there check-ins throughout the session to see, how are you doing? Are you in sort of what we call our window of tolerance, to be able to take this information in, right? Because if not, then what happens is, instead of the therapy and the homework being something that feels supportive and helping you towards your goals, what ends up happening is it can become another source of self-blame and shame when you forget, when you're not able to do it. And so that piece could be another thing that, if you've had that experience in the past. What I always say when I give out homework is, I'm not a teacher. I'm not grading you. I'm not judging you. I understand that, life gets in the way of life, and, the energy that we have for something at the beginning of the week, when time rolls around to actually do that, we may not have that same energy or capacity. So having an accountability partner, which is what I think, is part of the role of a therapist, is to help support you with, what are the barriers? Are there ways to, work through those barriers? And how can we better set you up for success? Okay? Always coming from a curious place, not a place of criticism or judgment. So the fifth thing that could go wrong in therapy is if the therapist does not meet you where you're at in terms of stage of change. So stage of change comes from motivational interviewing. And I think I'll do a whole separate video and write up around that, because there's a lot there. But in general, if we think about it in terms of, rather than seeing struggles or inability to complete homework, for example, or make progress, instead of seeing that as the client being resistant, the client not really being engaged, instead of blaming the client, judging the client, we come back to this idea of, maybe our approach does not match the stage of change that the client is in. And a client that is pre-contemplative or contemplative, so, not moving into action yet, they really require more curiosity. Like, let's better understand what's going on. Let's work on gaining awareness. And let's address some of the fears that might be getting in the way towards change. And always it's important to remember, you are the expert on you, right? And you will go as far as you're ready and able to go. And you shouldn't be judged or made to feel bad if, for a variety of reasons, you're not in that action stage of change. The next two issues have to do with a lack of respect for boundaries. Boundaries are so important in the therapeutic relationship. The reason being is because, you are coming into therapy when you are feeling most vulnerable. And I know a lot of the clients that I've worked with, they weren't taught or encouraged to know what their boundaries were, let alone be able to express those boundaries and hold those boundaries. So it's really important that, as the therapist, that we are doing that. We are doing that for our clients, and that you can kind of learn through modeling and through the here and now relationship. So 2 areas where this can go wrong. One is when the therapist is not clear on boundaries and ends up creating a relationship of dependency by seeing themselves as rescuing. So they therefore see you as a victim and put responsibility on themselves to rescue you, to take care of you, to make you feel better. So of course, those of us that go into the field, we are caring people, right? We wouldn't do this work if we didn't care. And it's hard. It's hard to see people hurting, suffering, being impacted by other people, and want to be able to take that pain away. But ultimately, that's not what's effective in therapy, and it's not healthy to see you as the victim. And so this does not take away from experiences that you may have had of being victimized. A victim role is like a mindset that we take on and that can hold us back. Okay. So if we as the therapists, if we are soothing and comforting whenever you're upset in the session, especially younger parts of you that might get activated, then what happens when you leave the session? Right? if you're not provided with those tools, those practices, those exercises to soothe and comfort yourself, instead of feeling empowered, right, you feel disempowered and overwhelmed. And then you might, be reaching out to the therapist more. And then if the therapist is not available, because it's after hours or they're seeing other clients, then that can create a sense of rejection or panic, and it's just not good. It's not good. So it comes from a good intention, right? It comes from that caring, but it's remembering that you are not a victim. You are creative, and you are, maybe you're a survivor of something, but you have your own autonomy, and you're resilient, and you have the ability, you sometimes just need a little bit of guidance, but you have that ability to learn to soothe and comfort and nurture yourself and be that compassionate, nurturing self to those younger parts of you that might be holding on to painful experiences. Another area where boundaries get disrespected and you leave the therapy feeling frustrated or feeling disempowered is if the therapist doesn't respect your autonomy, and you're feeling more like they're telling you what to do. So there's a difference between planting seeds, giving you resources that you can check out, making reflections and offering you to look at things through a different perspective, but ultimately coming back to this idea that you are the expert on you and allowing you to disagree, right? So if your therapist gets defensive or shuts you down when you disagree, that's not okay. In fact, I get really excited when my clients disagree with me because it's a sign of their authentic power and expression coming through. And, that's my ultimate goal for all of my clients, to connect to their authentic self. All right. So number 8 is about failing to make a repair. So if there is a disconnection or a lack of attunement, and we're human beings, right? It can happen, especially in this highly activated, time that we've been living in through this global pandemic, and having to switch things up and work in ways that maybe we weren't used to working in. So, it happens, and it's really important that, we can own that. And we have to be attuned enough to our own nervous system state so that we can recognize when there's been that misattunement, and to acknowledge that. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you're not going to feel that sense of connection and co-regulation from the therapist. And then if there is defensiveness on the part of the therapist, then that is just, it's adding another layer of invalidation, right, of your experiences, which is something that's often common with the clients that I've worked with, is having their emotional states be invalidated or minimized. So again, this is where it's so important, and this is number 9, is, as therapists, we need to make a lifelong commitment to our own personal growth and development and self-reflection and healing. And so if we're not committed to that, we might be more likely to project onto the clients. There might be more of that countertransference going on. And we could make the session about ourselves and our needs, or our problems even, as opposed to, sometimes there's an opportunity for use of self, and it can be a way of connecting and normalizing and reducing some of the shame, or there's a way to share some of the wisdom that we've gained from working through something. But it should never be about us and what we're needing, right? It should always be what is in the best interest of the client. And so number 10, just essentially it's about, again, what energy is the therapist bringing to you? You know, unfortunately, my experience in working in the nonprofit field is always this pressure to do more with less and to see more and to sort of be, to be everything to everyone. And that's not realistic. Um, nor is that necessarily beneficial. So, sometimes you don't have a choice, right? And you need to seek that funded support. Sometimes people don't realize that psychotherapy is covered by most group insurance plans, and so it doesn't have to be a huge expense. And then you can work with somebody who is really focusing in on a particular niche. And so the energy that they bring, the training, the passion is all directed to that particular client population and issue or issues. So that's something to keep in mind too, because if you worked with somebody and they were just stretched really thin, you just may not have felt that you were getting the support that you needed for the specific issues that you were going through. So I hope you find that helpful, just to kind of get a better understanding of some of the things that can go wrong. And ultimately for us as therapists, that we want to avoid. But nonetheless, unfortunately, it does happen sometimes. And so to just know that, it's not your fault. And if you're struggling, maybe it's time to give therapy a try again. Keeping in mind some of the things that I've shared with you, keeping in mind the idea that, you can do a free consult, introductory kind of mini session. And, you are not stuck. You're not stuck with anyone. So if you do a few sessions and that's when you realize, no, they're not a fit for me, or no, I don't like this approach, it's not too late. It's not too late. I know it's hard to start over. It's hard to tell your story again. But sometimes we have to do that a few times before we find the right person. But then when we find the right person, we can breathe a little bit easier. We can feel held and supported and empowered, to work through all of the different stuff, the stuff that we are bringing to our present moment, as well as all of this stuff in our present these days that can be highly stressful. So just want to remind you, you are worthy of that support. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to leave them in the comments, or send me a message or an email if you have any more questions about the process. I would be happy to answer those for you. Take good care.